The Trade Club is proud to present the 6th Annual Trade and Investment Conference entitled Trade and Conflict. Our goal for this conference is to inform the MIIS community that trade policy is not limited to tariffs, free trade agreements, and the WTO. Rather, it has implications for the environment, human security, non-proliferation, and terrorism, as well as development. We hope that you will enjoy today's event and take away a new perspective on trade policy. As a courtesy to today's guests and speakers, please silence all cell phones, computers, and tablets. Please also refrain from entering and exiting Irvine Auditorium during the presentations. Now please join me in welcoming President Ramaswamy, who will give today's opening remarks. Thank you, Sean.
Good morning to all of you. Can you hear me in the back? I feel like I'm giving a classroom lecture. Nobody wants to sit in the front and everybody wants to sit in the very back. Well, my job is very easy. I just have to welcome all of you, so I'm not going to ask any questions, and so continue to sit where you are. But please feel free to move down if you want to take advantage of hearing the conference participants better. So it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here, as Sean said, to the 6th Annual Monterey Institute International Trade and Investment Conference. I've been here for about the last 5. And as has become the tradition, the conference has been organized and produced by students. All the academics and other professionals in the audience will appreciate the fact that we've done a lot of this in our lifetime, but it's nice to see students take the lead from start to finish, including setting up of the agenda. They work with faculty, but by and large, it's a complete student-run conference. And their energy and enthusiasm, I'm pleased to say, has once again succeeded in attracting an excellent roster of distinguished speakers to the campus. For those of you who are new to Monterey and to the Monterey Institute, the Monterey Institute offers training in both graduate programs and special programs. In the graduate programs, about 800 students in 12 degree programs. And what makes all of them, in a sense, both distinctive, but what ties them all together is the emphasis on language and intercultural competency. It doesn't matter whether you're coming in to do translation and interpretation, or trade policy, or environmental policy, or an MBA, or a public administration, or one of the newest degrees, which is non-proliferation and terrorism studies. The degrees tend to be very pragmatic, immersive, and highly professional relevant. And I think we might be one of the few internationally professional-oriented graduate schools that has this as its mission. Our commitment, if you clicked on the website, of quote, to be the solution, is evidenced in the focus on very pragmatic, real-world problem solving that is present in each of our academic programs. So today, the focus of this conference on trade and conflict, and more specifically on how economic growth and development may promote social stability, could not be more timely. The questions being asked in today's panel sessions are being asked literally across the globe. Can increased economic interdependence mitigate the roots of violence? Or does trade foster its own destructive logic as well? And as somebody who used to teach regularly in the field of globalization or development and trade, it's interesting how these discussions of globalization has ebbed and flowed right through the 90s and the 2000s, and especially things have become sharper after the 2008 financial crisis, whether globalization is inevitable or when, in a sense, has sown its own seeds of destruction. And all of us in the room can also remember the times when people would say that one of the reasons the European Union in the 70s and 80s and 90s were reasonably successful will point to the fact that France and Germany, that went to war 3 times in the previous 100 years, after the signing of the Treaty of Rome in 1957, have actually been very stable partners. And so trade has a role in promoting economic commerce and partnership. And in fact, as I do a lot of my own research in India, people have often said that the South Asian subcontinent may actually become more stable if Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bangladesh traded with each other, much like the European Union does. So there is some logic to this whole debate about economic commerce, economic globalization, and conflict. The questions will be addressed today by a very distinguished panel of experts and our own students. And the visitors include Dr. Ashish Mehta, development economist and professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, Dr. Hisham Ahmed, a Middle Eastern expert and professor at St. Mary's College, Dr. Ravi Bhandari, a professor of economics and development at St. Mary's College, Dr. Tim Jostling, a repeat customer for us from Stanford, who is an expert in agricultural policy, food security and agricultural trade, and Keith Maskus, professor of economics and associate dean for social sciences at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Later this afternoon, we'll also be hearing from today's keynote speaker, Gary Horlick, whose distinguished career has included representing leading companies and more than 20 countries in international trade negotiations, serving as the first chairman of the WTO's permanent group of experts on subsidies, serving as International Trade Counsel for the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, and heading up import administration for the U.S. Department of Commerce. And before we get started with today's program, I also want to acknowledge and thank the students from the Institute's translation and interpretation programs who are here providing simultaneous interpretation of various parts of the day's proceedings in Chinese, French, and Russian. So if you're confident of your abilities in other languages, I strongly encourage you to take one of those headsets and listen to the proceedings in a different language. It gives them a lot of practice and they are very good at it. Special events like this conference offer wonderful opportunities for our students in the Institute's various degrees programs to work together and polish their professional skills in a real-world setting. With that, I'd like to thank you once again on behalf of the Monterey Institute for attending today's conference. And I invite you to join me in congratulating Sean Manzano and the entire MIIS International Trade Club. And I'd like to extend a very warm Monterey Institute welcome to all of you, and especially those who are visiting us from afar. Thank you very much. And I will turn over to Sean so that we can get started with the main part of the program. Thank you.
The next part of today's activities will be the student debate. If they would like to come up on stage, and Ms. Wang will give an introduction to today's debaters.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for the wonderful remark given by President Ramaswamy. And we're very happy to be here. I'm a second-year conference interpreting major student here at Monterey Institute. My name is Tintin. I'm very interested in debate. That's why I am the organizer and also the co-trainer of today's debate. First, a few thank you notes. I want to say thank you to the Trade Club. Without you, this conference wouldn't even be possible, and we wouldn't have this opportunity to present our debate here. Also, I want to thank you to my dedicated trainer, Ms. Lee, for those sleepless nights that she's been preparing for our debate. And also, very importantly, all of our debaters, Justin, Suwen, Zhang Weihao, Max, and also Lydia and me, because they're volunteering their time to be here, and I really appreciate their sense of responsibility. Here I would like to give you a little disclaimer because this is a student debate, so if you're here looking for the academic breakthrough or some truism at the high academic level, you probably will be a little bit disappointed because that part will be taken care of by our distinguished guest speaker as well as other panelists. And in a debate, what you appreciate is the crossfire of our thoughts and also the clashes between the arguments. And that's the part you need to appreciate in a debate. And now, game rule. In an Asian parliamentary debate or the world's university debate championship, when you agree with something, you knock on your desk and then say, here, here. So I would suggest you to pull out the desk at the side of your seat right now. Yeah, it is not compulsory, but I highly suggest you to do that because, yeah, showing respect to all the debaters and their arguments that they've been preparing for such a long time. And also, it's not supposed to be violent, so don't hurt yourself, please. And with all that, I would like to leave the stage to the Prime Minister, also the leader of the proposition, Mr. Zhang Weihao, to open the case. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for coming. I hope everybody in this room will subscribe to the grand narrative of international trade, which is the exchange of resources, goods, and services across borders. International trade aims to help countries with comparative advantages to gain global market share and to expand business potential on a global scale. When the conduct of the international trade is hindered, multilateral organizations and treaties are formed to make sure of its smooth process, such as the WTO. As a preposition leader and the first speaker of this House, I would like to first of all present you the motion of this debate. This House believes that Africa should liberalize their trade with China. By defining this motion, trade liberalization here refers to a policy where governments will not be allowed to discriminate against imports or impose great interference with exports by applying distorted tariffs, substantial subsidies, or quotas. And Africa here refers to countries on the African continent. I know many people in the US are not really fond of the Chinese government, but unfortunately there are 4 of us here Chinese in this debate, including me, so I'd like to tell you that we're not a bunch of panda hoggers, and we're not going to brainwash you with the Chinese government propaganda. Everything to be debated here is based on facts and objective research, and we want to present you a neutral description of the Sino-African trade relations. Just some basic facts to start this up. As of now, Nigeria, South Africa, Angola, Sudan, and Egypt are China's top 5 trading partners in Africa. The trade largely consists of natural resources like oil and mineral products. Before I talk about why Africa should liberalize their trade, let's first look at the scenario where the trade liberalization is not in place. First of all, heavy import tax will be retained. Currently, many African countries depend heavily on import taxes for their revenue. It even accounts for over 60% for some countries for their tax income. In Nigeria, the import tax amounted at $2.5 billion in 2011, which ridiculously was the second largest resource of the revenue after crude oil. Secondly, Africa's local businesses and infant industries can be protected from getting crushed by globalization. More or less, it can help retain their competitiveness. Then what if Africa embraces trade liberalization? They will for sure lose a major source of the government revenue. As tax revenue experiences sharp decline, the opposition may argue that people in Africa will have to suffer from inadequate public spending. But it is really true, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely not. Because the tax revenue is not benefiting the people at all. Transparency International releases a perception index every year that African countries are high on this list among the most corrupted countries. Of course, I am not concluding that tax revenues are corrupted because there is no direct evidence. But we've all seen the fact that even though tax revenue is high, public spending is not in place, poverty is still striking, and many people still live below $1 a day. On the contrary, after trade liberalization, governments will not be allowed to manipulate imports. Price for goods and services in the market will be cheaper and more affordable for people in Africa. In addition to this, there will be more incentives for private sectors to join in the market and flourish. There are true benefits that people really need in Africa. My teammates later will elaborate on these perspectives, but I think we all agree that all nations should work towards benefiting its people at first. Now let's come to the second point. Will trade liberalization hurt local businesses and infant industries in Africa? Well, on some levels, yes. But what is the status quo? Ladies and gentlemen, as a late starter, Africa has long been relying on foreign assistance for its infant industry development. Liberalization or not, this fact will not change. And I would like to bring China into the picture here. Why should China be the priority of Africa's trade liberalization? First of all, trade with China is too critical for Africa. China became the largest trading partner for Africa in 2008, and the bilateral trade hit $200 billion in 2012, and Africa is exporting 1/3 of China's oil supplies. Yes?
If China is already doing so well in trading with Africa, what makes you think there's a need for us to liberalize the trade?
Because I think China can have more access to more sectors in Africa, especially for China's private sectors. Because currently, the bilateral trade between China and Africa are solely on the government level. So I think it is a good opportunity for China's private sectors to really get into the African market. So as I said, Africa is exporting 1/3 of China's oil supplies and enjoys a trade surplus with China of $10 billion last year. And in return, China has invested heavily on Africa's infrastructure, building roads, ports, hospitals, and schools. And moreover, China is leading the international aid chart by providing Africa's healthcare and peacekeeping personnel. What makes China even more prominent is that China doesn't come in with an attitude. China's aid doesn't attach any political or ideological baggage. Since a late developer of Africa cannot possibly develop its way out of current circumstances, a preferable way is to rely on China and be pleased to have this humongous natural resource barrier. We believe it is essential for Africa to liberalize its trade with China, and we believe it is absolutely okay for African countries to keep relying on their natural resources. It is a huge blessing if it can be better developed and managed. So trade liberalization with China, yes. Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to begin with 3 points of rebuttal to what Wei Hao has just said. The first is he said that tax revenue is not benefiting African people at all. The tax revenue that is from the trade barriers that are in place against China. He brings corruption and other examples as reasons for this. One, that is not totally true. That's actually not true at all. Even if there is some degree of corruption in any of the countries within Africa, that isn't to say it's 100%, and it isn't to say that none of the money that is gleaned from these barriers helps the government or the people as a result. Prices may drop from increasing liberalization with China, but there are no jobs created for the African people by doing so. If you have many more products but no more jobs and no more ways for African people to earn money and to support themselves and to purchase these new products, then we won't have any benefit at all. How are they going to pay for these new products? The third point is that Wei Hao said that trade with China should be a priority and it's crucial for the African continent. I disagree with this as well. Trade with China should not be a priority, and I have a number of reasons why. It is not crucial for Africa either. Africa has a number of trade partners besides China. China is the #1 partner, that's true, but they only have around 13% of the trade. America has 11 or 12%. Countries such as France and Italy have 8 or 9%. And so we believe one of our main points is that we should increase the number of partners that China trades with and the amount of trade that they carry on with these partners. We believe that we should not rely too heavily on trade with China. We should keep the barriers that exist. We should empower the people of Africa in the different African nations. We should increase interregional trade within Africa, and we should diversify the main trade partners that Africa is currently trading with, so as to decrease reliance on China. As to the increasing of interregional trade within China, on October 24th, 2012, the World Bank published an article about Africa and how it can feed itself, earn billions, and avoid food crises by unblocking regional food trade. In this article, it says that Africa can earn an extra $20 billion per year if they just decrease the barriers that exist within the continent. The current situation is that countries have enough food, largely, but they can't move it back and forth across borders because of a number of different barriers. It could be legal barriers, political barriers, they could be small groups of people that demand bribes as they pass. There are a large number of barriers within Africa that really hinder its development and progress. And food, as we all know, is extremely important. In relation to this, BBC News in early 2011 had an article called China-Africa Trade Set to Keep on Booming in 2011. It had a number of examples why China-Africa trade is good, but it also brought up some examples that I thought require some thought. One is the poultry market in Zambia. Okay.
Can you tell us how enhancing the inter-regional trade within Africa can be mutually exclusive from the free up trade to China?
The question, I think, was why should interregional trade be separate from international trade? Is that correct?
No. Anyway, keep going.
I think that inter-regional trade is more important than international trade because we need to be able to build up the resources that are currently on the African continent. This isn't something that the international trade can really help. Yes, if people bring in different companies and provide jobs, but that isn't necessarily the case with China. As I was saying about the poultry monopoly, Zambia has had Chinese investors come in and set up companies in the poultry market. These investors have a lot more money than the locals do, and as a result, they can provide lower prices on poultry. Locals can't compete, and so China has developed a monopoly in the Zambian poultry market. In Ethiopia, there's a similar situation in agriculture where China comes in, purchases large plots of land, plants those plots, harvests them, and then sends everything back to China. They not only do this, but with a large number of companies, they have the payment of their workers, their employees, goes through Chinese banks. And so not only are the food products or the, say, poultry or agricultural products not reaching the local populations, but the money that comes from these sales isn't touching the local economies at all. It's going through Chinese banks right back to China. And so I think these are two very significant issues. My two partners will talk about more of our points, how Africa has benefits and how Africa should maintain its own sovereignty, as opposed to relying too heavily on China. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the second speaker of the proposition side, I would like to extend our talks on how free trade with China can benefit Africa as a region. My speech is divided into two parts. The first is my rebuttal. My rebuttal mainly goes to the point of monopoly. They said that the Chinese companies running their business in Africa will create such monopoly that hamper the infant industries in Africa. But ladies and gentlemen, I think my friends on the other side, they do not fully understand what really creates monopoly. Let's see, a slew of companies from the same countries doing the same business in the region will not necessarily lead to monopoly. Actually, monopoly can be formed by companies coming from different countries. I'll give an example. Rio Tinto from Australia, BHP Billiton from Australia, and Vale from Brazil. They're the three largest iron ore mining companies in the world. But they're now monopolizing China's iron ore supply market because they control over 70% of the iron ore restoration in the world. This is because this high threshold for the latecomers to enter into the industry that will bring about the monopoly. This is because it is very hard for the newcomer to start their business in this field. That will create this monopoly. Later, please. But let's look at the goods traded between Africa and China. They're mostly daily needs. They're mostly life necessities. So we don't need a very high resource or technological requirement to get involved in this business. The threshold for the latecomer in this industry is actually pretty low. And by opening up the market, by promoting this free trade motion, will actually invite in more competition into the market, but not create this monopoly. I'll take your point, Ms. Joy.
Yes, so how would liberalizing trade with China reduce this monopoly? Because most companies will come from China instead.
Yes, that's right. But I guess you still didn't understand my point, because we believe the best thing of the free market is that it will figure out the best products with the lowest price. I'll put it in this way. If I make a sandwich, you make a sandwich, everyone of here make a sandwich and we put them on sale, then people are going to figure out which one is the best sandwich, who can make out the best sandwich. And then we all know that we will not create a sandwich monopoly in MIIS, but we will know where to get the best stuff. I'll move on to my arguments point. My first point is that free trade can lower the price of the products, imported products. Let's look at Ethiopia. In this country, you have to spend $5 on a pair of slippers made in China, and you have to spend $5 on a bottle of soy sauce imported from China. But the same thing you can get in the Chinese market only costs you 1/5 of that price. Why the price in Ethiopia has been raised to such an unreasonably high level? That's because we believe it is the heavy tariff the local governments imposed on these import goods, which lifted the price and in turn push away those Chinese companies that could have exported more goods from China to Africa. So we believe by opening up the African market, we can expect to see more goods flowing into the region, and with the demand stay still and supply move rightwards, then you can see price being lowered, and if we're able to kick out the tariff part, then people in Africa can enjoy, can spend way less than what we're spending right now to buy their daily necessities. And we believe this is the fastest way to help people to afford their life necessities in that region. In my second point, I want to tell you that why China is the country that can provide the best and the most help. In this motion, I believe my friends on the other side might ask, why do you want to circle out China in this case? Because there are so many international organizations doing the good deeds in Africa as well, just like China. But they neglect this fact that many international workers in that region are only serving Africa as a part of their mission. They do not have their personal stake tied into this region. But it's different with China, because there are so many Chinese people now living in that region. I'll give you the number. 750,000 Chinese people, Chinese diaspora, are now living in Africa. So they did not go there by themselves. They brought their family together with them. So they will be looking for schools for their kids. They will need a hospital when they're sick. And they want roads, they want banks, and they want hospitals. And this is exactly what China has been doing over the past time. In August 2011, China has built more than 3,000 kilometers of roads, 2,000 kilometers of railway, 100 schools, and 60 hospitals. China is willing to help. China is ready to help. China has every reason to provide help. And it will be way faster for China to weigh in, to jump in to help out the infrastructure in Africa, rather than having people in Africa doing everything by themselves. Because we want to see that people in Africa can enjoy the benefits of the modern society as soon as possible. And we believe by this move of free trade, China and Africa can forge an ever closer tie between the two that will accelerate the modernization of Africa. And we want to provide these instruments for the local people to allow them to create a viable future by themselves. Let's do not forget that Africa is also entitled to the enjoyment we're having right now. And let's do not forget that it is our duty to protect, preserve, and defend the rights of the people in Africa to pursue a future with them being an integral part of it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate the compassion demonstrated by the proposition side. I really feel that I also consider people who live on this continent. That's why we need to find the best solution to solve the problem, instead of build this infrastructure dream on our fantasy. And I have 3 rebuttals to make. First of all, they're saying that monopoly does not necessarily hurt Africa's economy, and it will not necessarily generate monopoly if we liberalize the trade between Africa and China. Ladies and gentlemen, since the example given by my first speaker have shown you that monopoly exists in African countries, and it is generated by Chinese manufacturers or Chinese SOEs. And what we're talking about is not other industries like light industry, service industry. We are talking about food industry. We're talking about the food price that might be adjusted or manipulated by another country, by another economy, by another enterprises. That is strategically dangerous. And I can't believe that my opponent even offered me another example of food, which is sandwich and MIIS. Ladies and gentlemen, what if they have a billion to make sandwich to compete with me, who have only $100 in my pocket? Of course they can lower the price. Of course they can give subsidies. Of course they will crush this industry, and of course they will build monopoly. And here the second one is a lowering the price argument. They believe that it will lower the price. Yes, it probably, potentially might lower the price. However, ladies and gentlemen, what if this liberalization only happened between African countries and China? How would this group of Chinese companies lower the price for African people? Instead, they have the dominance in this industry, and they have a say on the price setting mechanism. Moreover, even if you lower the price, how can you possibly make the poor people on the continent who don't even have their infant industry, who don't even have the fundamental basis of their economy to purchase these products. Also, they made this argument that saying China is building these infrastructures on African continent. It will help African people in the long run. Ladies and gentlemen, those infrastructure contracts are based on a profit-driven basis. Those are not some voluntary projects given by Chinese government. Here comes my contention part. As the opposition, we firmly believe that Africa should not liberalize its trade with China. It will destroy Africa's economic potential and its long-term development. It will suffer from a loss of advantage of backwardness. What is advantage of backwardness? When a country is lagging behind in its economic and social development, then the country can use its comparative advantage, such as low-skilled labor and low-end, easily developed manufacturing industry. And ladies and gentlemen, according to development economic principles, this is a have-to track. This is not like you can choose it or not. And why does Africa need advantage of backwardness? I'll give you that one example. In 1970, after the opening up and reform policy in China, unlike other transitional economies, China started to rationalize its economic goals and started to use the advantage of backwardness, such as cheap labor, easily developed manufacturing industry. And all the industrialized and transitional economy needs this first step in their economic development. Africa is in its initial stage of development, where advantage of backwardness is very crucial. Improving the literacy and education level so as to develop a high developed service industry or technology intensive industry will be too hard for African countries to achieve. And why does the state need to limit the market and have market restrictions in order to gain that advantage? From the history, throughout the history, look at this. For those early developers such as United States and UK in the 18th century, they had minimum international competition. That's why they face when they face no international competition, they will have very limited state role in restricting their market. However, for those middle developers such as Japan and Germany, they started to impose state roles and to use the government interference in order to protect their market and protect their infant industry, because they faced increasing and intensifying market competition. And for China and Russia, who are quite late developers, they use even harsher, even more intensified government interference on their market restrictions to protect their industry and their market. Not mentioning the late developers like African nations. Without market restriction, they can't even possibly build up their own fundamental industry, which is manufacturing industry. And how well liberalization crippled this advantage of backwardness? The liberalization will expose African economy to the dominance of other countries' products, just like what the opposition said. The products will flood into Africa, and those infant industries wouldn't even be able to compete with these products and these enterprises. That's how Africa's own infant industry will be crippled. And you may say that China will bring investment, will bring factories, China will have helped Africa out. Yeah, however, China needs those factories. China needs those manufacturing industries for its own. China does not possess the technological capacity that is strong enough, will help it to let go of the manufacturing industry and manufacturing edge. And it's against, already China is under the criticism of other countries of unfair trade between Africa and China, and also the natural resource exploitation. And it's against China's foreign policy, and it will prove the criticism right. And it is the damage of China's image, and the cooperation between ASEAN countries and China will be posed to great threats. And whoever, in fact, current status quo can already satisfy Africa's demand and China's desire of all the natural resources and everything. So it is a double-edged sword that will hurt not only Africa, but also China as a whole. And the curse of resources might stay with African continent forever. And those people who are still suffering, like a huge population on African continent, still suffer from starvation. They need industry that is solid enough for them to be economically independent, so that they can pursue a long-term development. Based on all these reasons, we firmly believe that the opposition should take this step. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have one point of rebuttal. The opposition side states that
through trade protectionism, African nations can enjoy the same development path that Europe and America faced in the 19th and early 20th century. I'm not here to discount that idea. However, let's take a look at their development path for those many, many dark years. In America, we had corruption, we had domestic monopoly, we had to go through trials and tribulations for many, many decades before we finally came to the light to understand that through international trade, we can improve competition within our own domestic market, and that we could help to mitigate the effects of monopolies and trade or market distortions caused by domestic players. Why should we condemn Africa to the same course for the same extremely long development period that we in America had to face? Instead, I want you to talk about the true problems that Africa faces in the ways that trade liberalization can help.
How can you explain China's fast economic boom through restrictions on their market?
Well, I would say that China's development is more of a story of slowly liberalizing rather than closing off and remaining closed. In fact, many of China's newly developed economic growth has been the result of trade liberalization. But getting back to the African continent, what is really necessary for them to build right now is infrastructure, it's education, it's healthcare. Right now, in Africa, we really take for granted here in America that we have roads, we have hospitals, we have schools. Many places in Africa still don't have these, and I don't mean to overgeneralize. But through trade liberalization, we have seen an enormous amount of investment coming from China and into the African continent. All of these sources of investment have built roads, they've built schools, they've built hospitals, things that African businesses need in order to compete in a modern global marketplace. Many would argue that China lacks that Africa lacks the planning, that lacks the real competence of governance in order to make sure that these roads are going to the people that need them the most, that these are roads going from the mine to the port. However, right now, Africa's competitive edge is its commodity resources, and developing those is a benefit for Africa. Furthermore, China has enhanced the educational atmosphere of Africa. It has trained 30,000 technical workers, and before you think that these are simply low-paying jobs to work on roads, even in the high-tech sector, even in telecommunications, we are seeing Chinese firms hiring local African employees. Huawei has hired 60% of its workers on the African continent locally. This means high-paying jobs for Africans, and that is exactly what they need at this time. Furthermore, I don't want the overgeneralization that investment is only one way, that it's going only from China into Africa. Those trailblazers from Africa have started to make their way into China. Currently, the largest brewing company in China is part-owned by a South African firm, S.A.B. Miller. The largest daily newspaper in Beijing is also a South African part-owned company. Really, there's $2 billion worth of investment going from South Africa into China. And I know that this is the exception and not the trend. But through further trade liberalization on both sides, Africa and China, we could see that businesses can develop the roads, the infrastructure, the education they need to build industry and export into China without this false protectionist shield of tariffs and quotas. So, in conclusion, I hope that you will see that further trade liberalization between Africa and China can benefit both sides in enormous ways, and that the future can be very bright if each embraces each other's business with their culture and with their investment. Thank you very much.
and gentlemen. First of all, I'm very happy to actually hear a US speaker supporting China in today's debate. And he has such strong points that I'm very happy as a Chinese. But before we go on to this debate, being the third speaker, or being the last speaker of this debate, there are two things that really makes me happy. First, there will be no rebuttals from that side. And secondly, I will summarize this whole debate for you, so that if you have drifted out, drift in and out throughout this debate, now it's my speech that you should listen to. Before I go on to summarizing this debate, I just have three main things that I need to ask the proposition. First, will China stop trading with Africa or investing in Africa without this trade liberalization? We say no, because Africa has its resources that China needs. Africa has a huge market with 45 member states of the African Union plus Morocco and a population of over 1 billion people. We say that poses a huge potential for the Chinese products. So China will not easily give up that market. Secondly, it's also the largest regional group in the UN, comprising of 28% of the total UN members. So we say that's a very strong alliance that China will not give up. China needs Africa, probably more than what Africa needs China for. So we believe that China will continue to offer this help, this aid, and these investments, even though we don't liberalize their trade. However, trade liberalization does bring more harm to Africa than China, which I will elaborate further on in my speech. Secondly, we also recognize the importance of international trade, but we don't believe that trading with China alone is the way to go. We should diversify our trading scheme by engaging with multiple partners who will also offer job opportunities and also the domestic products that people need. When it comes to international trade, we believe that monopoly is not the way to go. Even a monogamous relationship is not in our interest too. When it comes to international trade, we believe in engaging in multiple partners. Number three, like Justin said, China is successful because of a slow liberalization. So we believe that there is a process for a country to open up its market. It must not, what they're proposing is to remove all barriers right now so that Chinese products can flood into the African market, and that's going to bring more harm. We believe that Africa has to take its course by following the steps that's most suitable for their national conditions. So now let me do a harm and benefit analysis for all of you today. We believe that trade liberalization, absolute trade liberalization with China will worsen existing exploitation problems and harms the domestic manufacturing industries. There will be more cases of market monopoly and farmland exploitation, as my first speaker have already mentioned. It is very dangerous, I cannot emphasize this enough, to leave your basic livelihoods, to leave the food industry in the hands of a foreign country. And also, we believe that that problem can be solved through increase of regional trade, as Max already pointed out to you. Africa can feed itself. It can become a self-reliant continent. Now let's talk about soy sauce and slippers, as the second speaker have talked about. Soy sauce and slippers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure when was the last time you had Ethiopian dish or a kebab dish. They don't usually use soy sauce. So the $5 soy sauce doesn't really harm the livelihoods of these people. Being a strong advocate of Asian cuisine myself, I have 3 different types of soy sauce at home. But I don't believe that the African cuisine relies that much on the Chinese products. Also about slippers. Maybe the consumers prefer to wear domestic produced footwear instead of Chinese slippers. So we say that my point is the price of these products are usually determined by the supply and demand existing in that domestic market. It is not just something that we think that everything is cheap and it's good. We believe competition is more the way to go. There's a reason why tariff subsidies and quotas exist in Africa. It is to protect the domestic market and also to encourage greenfield investments. The manufacturing sector in Africa currently employs 35% of Africa's total population, the largest in its economy. We believe that if we open up the African market completely, it will cause the made in China products to flood the African market, killing the domestic industries. And will actually weaken Africa's bargaining chip, which is its market and natural resources, and provides less incentive for Chinese companies to go in and make greenfield investments. Because now they can just export their products from China to Africa without establishing a domestic manufacturing plant in Africa. And that cross out all the spillover effects, all the technology transfer, and all the other benefits that the proposition is making today. And now, secondly, this disturbs Africa's potential trade relationship with other partners, ladies and gentlemen. Because Africa needs a more diversified trading partner. It needs Brazil and India to actually come in to help with their telecommunication industry instead of just China. They need Japan to come in to help boost their automotive business, not just China. Africa has a huge market, it has a huge incentive. The idea is not to saturate the market as soon as possible, but to use it in a way that brings the most benefit to Africa, to divert the FDI to the right places. And last but not least, the point I would like to make is by engaging too much with a certain country, like China, it takes away the region's voice in the international negotiation table, ladies and gentlemen. We all know that global governance is just a big game, a political game, and lobbying comes in the form of diplomacy, and political contributions come from trade and aid. Africa currently has 3 seats in the Security Council in the United Nations, 14 seats in the Economic Social Council, and 13 seats in the Human Rights Council. But its voice is not heard in the international arena. Why is that? Because most of their interests and most of their votes in the United Nations are influenced by their biggest trading partners, the United States and China. But by diversifying our trade partners, the interest of the African people, of the African region, will not be overlooked. They could truly bring their voice to the international negotiation table. So we believe by empowering the people, by resolving the basic livelihood issues, by building infrastructures, and fully utilizing the bargaining chip of Africa, and by strengthening the private sector through engaging with multiple partners when it comes to international trade, we could build a stronger Africa. The future of Africa does not lie in Chinalization. It lies in globalization. Thank you.
I assume that everyone is waiting for a Q&A session, but luckily we don't have one. So. Do we get to vote?
Do you get to vote? Do they get to vote?
Yeah, you can vote. We would like to see a vote. Who vote for the proposition set? Please raise up your hand.
Clap and shout.
Yeah, yell.
Clap and shout.
Okay, who vote for the opposition side? Thank you so much.
I just want to thank the debate team for that great performance. Right now we're going to have a lunch break from now until 12:45. We're going to reconvene here for the panelists' presentations and discussions. Thank you.
Yes, that's the good thing. Thank you. Yeah. So they're all tied up together, or no?
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's driving.
Does that make it straight? I worked in 45 years.
It's always a problem.
It hasn't become that, but we're trying to. Actually, now, look at more well-known standards. So, TPP trade or agreement, right? I don't know. At least with decades. At the end of the day, just leave it there.
Thank you so much. I don't just say like an hour, but
Right, exactly. Right. Yes, totally, yes. Totally, absolutely. But I think
good. How sorry I read.
I'm sure you have questions for Dr. Mehta and Dr. Ross. His name is Timothy.
Whatever I need either way.
Yes? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Special.
Excuse me, could everyone please move forward by any chance? Move towards the front, that'd be great. Thank you, please come. Thanks.
Well, I think we can mention it.
Hello, mine's working. Mine is working.
Hello? Yes.
Hello? Okay. But I assume you can't hear our thoughts as well, because it's some.
Yeah, they said they're good.
Yes. Stop. Are we doing presentations? No, we're going to discuss.
Discuss what you presented. Yes.
everyone. Welcome back. We are now at the panel discussion portion of the conference. Professor Liang is going to be our moderator and help us with the discussion. At the end of this session, there will be a Q&A available for anyone that has any questions. So just go to the two mics that are on the aisles. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be the moderator for this round of panel discussion. And